Welcome to my Ultimate Human Torch Guide. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Tephrite. I've been Eternity and top 500 since the alpha, and also peaked as the rank 1 Human Torch, playing nothing but Torch solo queue. On top of my knowledge and experience, I've scoured the internet for guides and tricks to give you the best guide possible. This video will be timestamped, but if you do want to skip ahead to specific parts, feel free, but I highly recommend watching all the way through. I'll be going over his abilities, playstyle and combos you want to be utilizing, and some advanced tips and tricks. If you think I missed something or have any questions at all, I'll be streaming Marvel Rivals over at twitch.tv/Tephrite98 almost every day, and I'll be happy to help. Alright, let's start out with the obvious. Johnny is one of the few flyers in the game, sitting at 250 HP, but doesn't move all that fast. So the first ability we're going to be covering is Plasma Body. Plasma Body is a very simple ability that allows Torch to increase his movement speed by 50%. It doesn't have a cooldown, however it does have an energy meter, which you can see on the side of Johnny when the ability is activated. This can be great for repositioning or maneuvering around the map, however he does have a more immediate movement ability, which we'll touch on later. For now, let's get into the damage side of things and talk about his primary fire cluster. Torch throws out a slightly slow projectile in essentially the form of a fire shotgun. He's got 6 in the chamber, which regenerate relatively quickly. The graphic in the middle of the screen can make it a lot easier to track. You'll notice as soon as you're about to run out of clusters that you can still fire, but at a slower rate. As you can also see, the patterns for his primary fire can vary quite a lot, some looking slim and tall, some short and wide, and others just a full-blown circle. This is why his primary fire can feel super inconsistent sometimes. It did used to feel worse as the projectile speed was a lot slower, but he did receive a nice buff to his clusters to increase that consistency. Since it is a shotgun, you want to be relatively close to the target, but being a flyer can make that a bit tricky. This is also amplified by the 60% damage falloff at 40 meters, but I'll cover more about this in the playstyle section. When spamming clusters, the regen can be a little weird, so you want to be weaving in your secondary ability, which is your Blazing Blast. Torch gets 3 charges of Blazing Blast, which you can see either circling around him or on the UI in the bottom right. Johnny throws one of his fireballs, dealing 40 damage on direct impact, as well as creating a flame field on the floor if the target hit is also on the floor. Jumping or flying targets will not create this field, so if you do want to leave a field, which will help with some of your other abilities, aiming at the floor is more ideal. Similarly to the primary fire, Blazing Blast regens relatively quickly too. Blazing Blast is a big fundamental in Human Torch's kit, as it enhances every ability in some way. For starters, due to the way the regeneration works with its clusters, it's very beneficial to weave a Blazing Blast in between your cluster damage, as it allows you to remain topped up on clusters whilst also outputting the highest amount of DPS. You can also stack fields, which can allow for some great burst, especially with his next ability, Flaming Meteor. Torch dive bombs to the ground, dealing 40 damage to anyone in the area, and also knocks them back, meaning yeah, you can go for environmental kills. Being able to mass displace is a super strong component and shouldn't be overlooked. Depending on where the opponent is in reference to Torch can determine in which direction they get pushed in. Diving behind them, they'll get pushed behind you. I personally love to use my dive bomb as a way to peel for my team when Strange lands his ultimate on my teammate, so get creative and save your teammates. Unlike Venom Slam, there's no indicator, so it can be a bit hard to tell where you can dive. However, a good place to look is the bottom right of the UI, as the dive bomb icon will turn red if you're unable to dive to the place you're looking at. If Torch dive bombs within 3 meters of a flame field, it will cause it to detonate, dealing an extra 55 damage per field. This is the burst damage I was talking about. This is where he can get super lethal, as 2 Blazing Blasts and a dive can kill 250 HP targets, whilst 3 can kill up to 350 HP. This also means that if you're able to catch someone stunned or with bad movement, you can one-shot them inside a major support ult like Luna or Cloak. This also works great as a combo with Groot's ultimate. Whilst its primary use is to do damage and explode his flame fields, you can also use it as a getaway tool too if you're finding yourself in a sticky situation. If you see a Spider-Man about to dive you, slamming down can also negate his entire engage, but more on that later. Now I mentioned how his Blazing Blast is useful to all his abilities. Well, it is absolutely essential to his Pyro Prison. Pyro Prison allows you to connect all the flame fields on the floor to form a prison, burning all the enemies inside. Whilst the walls will always do damage when crossed, the prison itself will only be activated if there's no obstruction between the fields. This could be anything from the payload to a Groot wall to even steps that are just a little bit too high. This is only checked at cost time, so if the Groot wall is destroyed after the prison has been made, the walls will remain disconnected. You can create any shape with any number of links. 2 fields will create a line, 3 a triangle, and so on and so forth with no max limit. The maximum linked distance is huge though, stretching to 40 meters, so you can make some absolutely insanely big prisons. Contrary to popular belief, the Pyro Prison can actually climb up or down levels as long as it doesn't exceed 2 meters. This, accompanied with the available horizontal length, can allow you to be super creative and set entire points or even staircases on fire. Some can be a little impractical to do, as you will get shot out of the sky before you're able to complete it, but there's definitely some undiscovered locations. Oh, and I'm sure you all want to know how to make the force, so here's how you do it. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to his final ability, which is his Supernova. Johnny goes Supernova, doing explosive burst damage 20 meters around him for about 80 damage, as well as refreshing and giving him infinite blazing blast charges, and upgrading them, turning them into flame tornadoes, which now deal 120 damage per second. You can have up to about 5 tornadoes active at a time before one runs out. You can actually sneak in a blazing blast right before you ult, which will turn into a flame tornado as soon as it's popped. The burst damage isn't insanely high though, unless you're stacking the tornadoes. However, keep in mind the enemies can just run out of them. Johnny has 2 team-ups, one with Storm and one with Invisible Woman. I've touched on one with Invisible Woman briefly already, but in essence, it's the Fantastic Family team-up, where Torch gets a maximum of 100 bonus health. I would recommend doing this when you're 100% sure you know you're about to take damage, or are taking damage already, or even just use it as a pseudo heal until your strategists have time to look at you. I tend to pop it a lot after a dive bomb, as you're most likely in a very dangerous position. The next team up is with Storm. There's multiple ways to activate it. You can either wait for Storm to ult and then either press the team up key, which will pop your ultimate, as well as setting her ablaze, or wait for her to choose a starting spot and throw a tornado at her. Obviously, this team up does require 2 offensive ultimates, so I'd only recommend using this if you're trying to chew through a strategist ult. As we're coming up to season 2, these team ups might get changed or flat out removed, so if you're wondering why you don't have it, that might be it. Right, that's it for his abilities. Now let's get into some playstyle tips. With Torch being a flyer, positioning is super vital, as you're more likely to be out in the open and less likely to receive healings, as your supports probably won't look up. Having a Luna Snow or an Invisible Woman on your team can make a huge difference, as having Snowflake can give you straight up passive healing whenever, and having Sue Shield can also allow you to take on extra duels and make riskier plays, without having to worry about heals for a second. It also completely counters Spidey's Engage with the Symbiote team up, so as soon as you see him coming on you, pop that shield and you're gold. Whether you have a team well suited to Torch or not, you want to be flying next to cover at all times, ideally playing at medium range from your opponents. Playing next to cover will make it harder for enemies to finish you off, as it will allow you to duck behind it and give your team time to heal you. You always want to be thinking about enemy sightlines and where they're going to be trying to shoot you from. Hit scan duelists like Punisher, Hela, Black Widow, and even Star-Lord can be counters to you. And if ever possible, I would recommend straight up banning Hela, as she is the hardest character to play against in my opinion. Characters like Psylocke, Hawkeye, and even Adam Warlock can be a nuisance too though. Remember, just because they are playing the character that counters you, it doesn't mean you are getting countered. They could just be completely ignoring you. As I mentioned before, you want to be playing within medium range for the most part, but constantly alternating from close to long range depending on the situation. Setting up Pyro Prisms would be ideal from a long range position, however your clusters do most damage when you're up close and personal. So you want to be floating between the two depending on what you're trying to do. Because of this, Torch's target priority can be a bit all over the place too. It's not as simple as a flanker who just dives the backline. While squishies are the easiest to take out with your dive combo, your clusters do an insane amount of damage to vanguards, especially if you're able to land those headshots at close range. The best thing to do is assess who's out of position and punish them. Since you're a flyer, you have access to everyone in the battlefield, so you should take advantage of this flexibility. I did a Bronze to GM speedrun with Torch if you'd like to see how I play him in different ranks. This was before the recent buffs though. If you find yourself getting shot out of the sky very often, you can actually spam your melee to increase your chance of dodging enemy bullets. Torch's melee animation changes the shape of his body quite a lot, which can make aiming at him quite annoying and very difficult, so I would highly recommend using this if you need to cross out into the open. Earlier I mentioned that alternating between your clusters and your blazing blast is ideal for high DPS, however your clusters might be hard to hit on flying or fast moving characters, unless you're relatively close to them. Personally, I like using my blazing blast on targets like Spider-Man and Storm, as the speed and the hitbox of the projectile is a lot easier to land, unless you're right up in their face, then go ham. When using your ultimate, dive bombing whilst the tornadoes are up can essentially push them out of it and waste your tornadoes. So what I tend to do is set up a Pyro Prism, then try go for a double Firefield dive bomb, then pop my ultimate, using that initial burst damage from Supernova to hopefully guarantee a kill, or at least get people low enough for the tornadoes to finish them off. My general approach to Torch follows almost a 3-step process. First, I peek out from above or even a flank and try my best to set up as big of a Pyro Prison as possible. This immediately puts the strategists under pressure and can even delay flankers from starting their flank, all whilst you're building your ultimate charge. Doing this also makes enemy movement a bit more predictable, as they'll be most likely trying to get out of the prison as fast as possible. If I'm on attack, I tend to prison the entire point, but on defense, I tend to prison the choke points where they'll be pushing from. The next step would be to set up a dive. The trickle damage from the prison allows you to analyze everyone's health and pick the target being neglected by the heals. A couple clusters until you're able to set up a double or triple flame field, and then the final step would be to dive bomb and immediately get out. Flyers are a big priority of mine, however when popping deploy my ultimate, I tend to go for the major threats first, i.e. the hit scan characters like Hela, and then proceed to kill their backline. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. Like I said earlier, if you think I missed something, feel free to leave a comment down below or ask me on my Twitch. If you found this at all helpful, be sure to subscribe and share with a fellow Torch enjoyer. Peace.